So we see in the Standard here that they're doing a lovely article here on the auctioneers turning detective to discover more about antiques. Indeed, that's a daily occurrence really with this business. So let's see if we can help you do something to help yourselves in this area. This, as you can see, is a chest of drawers. What do we know about it? Well, it's made of walnut, which is a good, you would think, local English wood, but we also used to get a lot of walnut from France actually back in the day when this was made. We'll come on to that. Given away by lots of things. One, the look of it, the colour of it, but also the fact that it's got a lovely bit of woodworm in here. Now you'd think that was bad news, wouldn't you? But actually with early walnut I always get a bit suspicious if there's no woodworm in it, because it happens to be the woodworm's favourite food. So if this, as it is 300 years oldish, has no woodworm at all, that would be really weird and unusual. So actually quite nice to see a bit of woodworm in there. It's all polished in, looks okay. And this sort of early furniture of this period, from really about sort of 1680 to 1720, 30, walnut was a very popular wood and used almost exclusively for this sort of furniture other than oak furniture. Then why did it die out? Why did we stop using it? Well, two things really. One, we used to get a lot of our walnut from France. Totally we come back to that. And in France there was a disease in the walnut. Do you remember Dutch elm disease? Well, it was a little bit like that, and coinciding with a massive storm. Do you remember the 87 storm? Some of you may do. Well, what we did then was we lost a lot of elm. Well, in France they lost a lot of walnut, like most of it, nearly all of it. And so it became very much more difficult to get hold of. Now this coincided with the better travelled trade connections with all sorts of exotic parts of the world, and we started then to use a little bit more mahogany. We'll come back to that as well. So how do we know how old this is? Well, we look at the construction. One, pieces like this were always veneered. Walnut was expensive even when it was relatively plentiful. This is, as you can see here, there's a nice, you would think, relatively thin veneer along here. But actually, if you look closely, it's really quite thick compared to modern veneers. Why would that be? Well, this of course was made pre-industrial revolution, 1720. So it's before machines, before wonderful woodworking machines were invented that allowed you to cut the veneers really, really thin, which was much more efficient. This was done by hand, and you can see here where it's thicker here to here. In fact, the whole drawer, if you look at the way the drawer is constructed, nice and thick this end, thin this end. Why? Because it wasn't easy to do by hand. So that's the first thing to look for here. Look at the thickness of the veneers. If you've got a nice, thick, chunky veneer, it's likely that it's pre-industrial revolution and therefore of the period that this is. Also, if you look at the inside of it, it's very unlikely that you will see on a chest of drawers of this age the original handles. Now you do find them sometimes, but quite often they're changed with fashion. You see quite often a big circular hole here that's been filled where you had the Victorian knob handles put in. This would be the original handles here, which would have been possibly little teardrop handles, and on the front here you can see the replacement handles that somebody's put in to look sort of Georgian. Well, they're actually the wrong sort of handles. They're a bit later than this chest of drawers would have actually had in the first place. But, so look at the handles. Very simple things to look out for. Then you can actually see inside the chest of drawers and have a really good look here. And you can see inside there's a piece of wood here, this drawer runner, which keeps the drawer actually sitting in the chest of drawers. That's been replaced, yeah, and you can cut off at the back. This side, you can see over here, you can see these massive grooves. Now there's a drawer been going in and out of there for nearly 300 years. Well, of course it's going to wear. If you find something like this with no wear and tear on it whatsoever, start to become suspicious. It means either it's been replaced or it's not original at all, and the thing's much later than it looks. Okay, so moving on from the walnut furniture to quite often the more common mahogany furniture used throughout the Georgian and Victorian periods, certainly well into the 19th century and into the early 20th century. Why did that happen, do we think? Well, trade links, of course, and shipping and transport and all sorts of things were a major factor. We could get further afield, and they discovered all these wonderful exotic woods like mahogany. That, coinciding with the demise of the walnut supply and then generally fashion, saw a proliferation of loss of mahogany. And this is very much a mahogany probably from the sort of South American regions, or Honduras, that sort of area. Difficult to be too precise about where this is from, but this was the wood used as a preference, as the smart, posh, fashionable, cool wood of the early 19th century, and really from the late 18th century, but into the 19th century certainly. Okay, again, putting our detective's hat on, we can see the changes that have happened to this chest of drawers. Again, something to look out for. Look for changes, look at the construction. In here we have something that shouldn't be there, and then we have here the change of handles again. This is a sign of, in all likelihood, an earlier brass turned handle on here, which would have been fashionable in about 1820 when this was made. They've replaced the handles here with these Regency style handles, which they would have expected to have seen on this sort of chest of drawers. Actually, these replacements again. So you can sometimes see on these a bigger hole that's been filled, and that will have been the Victorian knob handle. So a turned wooden handle, much more chunky. The good news is that, of course, again, this helps us date it, because if you've got changes of handles, it means it's lived through one period into another, from one fashion into another. And so you can see here exactly that happening. And here you can see it's been in the 1960s or 70s as well, with the addition of this wonderful fablon. We all miss that, don't we? So there we have it, a nice Regency 1820s chest of drawers, given away by the handles and the wood used. We then can go on to later mahogany, and we can actually distinguish that from this quite simply. Okay, so going from the early 18th century into the early 19th century, we're now looking at something made slightly later. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this lovely inlaid decoration here in various exotic woods onto the mahogany. Surely that's Sheraton. Well, in style maybe, and that was a direct reaction against the loud, curvy sort of designs of Victorian furniture. We went back to a slightly more austere looking Sheraton style furniture in the early 20th century. And we can tell this again very simply when you look closely. And I don't know whether you'll be able to see this, but you can try on your own anyway. If you look at the mahogany here, it has a slightly yellower, paler, blonder fleck to it, which is a type of mahogany brought out of the West Indies and used into this in furniture like this, really only from the latter part of the 19th century into the early 20th century. So whilst this might look every inch something Sheraton late 18th century, and in style it certainly has all that going for it. Practically, it can't be of that period, because this wood was not used until much later, so it has to be of that Edwardian period. Well, hopefully that gives you a few pointers into how to look at your furniture in a different way and try and find out a bit more about it. However, the bad news is that people have been faking this sort of stuff throughout the 19th century, well into the 20th century, and even today. And they will make old-looking pieces of furniture out of bits of old furniture put together at a later date. Well, that would mean grinding down the drawer runners to make them look old, using old drawer fronts with new carcasses of chest of drawers, that sort of thing, and they do it with all of it, really. So my advice is, if you're in any doubt, consult with somebody like myself. There are other people out there too, so that we can really take a close look and look with some experience at really what you've got there.